What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 1 of the Boochcast reviews Darkside of the Ring. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know for a long time we've been promoting this for the YouTube channel, that we were finally going to put this thing together, and now that we're on our hiatus, it is time for us to finally get these episodes out to you, and I'm very excited to start this long Darkside of the Ring journey. And before I get started, there's a few things I'm going to clarify before I get into this first episode. The first thing is, as you know, Darkside of the Ring had multiple episodes. Each episode is going to be on one video, so we're not going to go through every single episode in one video. So basically, episode 1 is basically going to review the first episode of the first season, The Darkside of the Ring. Next week's episode, we'll do episode 2, and so on and so forth, till we get to the end. So I want to clarify that. So don't worry about having to sit here for an extremely long period of time. Second thing I want to clarify is for the moments where I'm going to be by myself, as you can see, this microphone here, I know this may or may not be distracting to some people, or it might look weird, but the way this microphone is set up, the only way it can pick up my voice is if it's right next to my face. Now, the good news is it doesn't pick up any of the noises around me. So, for example, you can't hear the vent, the air vent that's pumping the heat through the house. You don't have to worry about hearing the washer or the dryer that's running, or the TV that I accidentally left on in my bedroom that's right across the hall. You're not going to hear any of that. You're just going to hear me talking. Now, I tried to see if I can move this microphone further up, because it's attached to a clamp and it can kind of move up and down like that. And I can also fold it up, that way it's not in front of me when I'm not recording. But I try to get it up there, but the problem is if I talk, it's going to come out, and I'm going to end up talking like this. Hey everybody, welcome to Joe today. How you doing? We don't need that shit. Okay? You don't need that kind of drama in your life. I don't need that kind of drama in my life. Lord knows I have enough drama in my life. So hopefully this isn't distracting to you, but if it is, know that it serves a purpose, so you can clearly hear what the fuck I'm saying. Now, the third thing I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to give a little disclaimer before I jump into this episode. This is the first episode of Darkside of the Ring, which means we're going to be discussing the match made in heaven, which is the real life and storyline relationship and marriage of Miss Elizabeth and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Step into a Slim Jim. Ooh, yeah. Dig it. Now, the reason I'm giving a disclaimer here is because some of you might have heard the Macho Man impression I just did, and most of you probably enjoyed it. There might be some of you out there going, Booch, that is a terrible Macho Man impression. Well, there's a reason for that. If you listen to the recent podcast episode that I put out, which was NXT TakeOver Vengeance, you know that I mentioned having a sore throat. I've recently recovered from a sore throat, and I am currently in the process of, the good news is my throat's not sore anymore, but it is still kind of bugging me a little bit. I am dealing with some other, health problems. Nothing like major. It's not like a major issue. They're just minor stuff that's kind of affecting my voice a little bit. Like, I can talk normally, but if I go too deep or too aggressive with the Macho Man impression, it'll fuck up my throat. I've done multiple takes with this where I was doing my Macho Man impression because I want to be entertaining with this instead of just sitting here like a robot going, they had such a great marriage. I don't want to do that shit. I want to be entertaining because that's how I am. But I'm just going to let you know, my Macho Man impression, because of how my voice has been going, is not going to be my best work. So I'm just letting people know in advance. If my impression sucks, it's because my voice is going through some, fucked up shit, because I've had a sore throat recently. So that's the reason why. Now, when my voice is fully recovered, if I need to do a whole YouTube video of me reenacting a Macho Man promo to prove to you guys that I can do this impression effectively, let me know, and I will do it if that's what it takes. But just bear with me through that. So that being said, we're going to jump on in it. We got the match made in heaven, Macho Man Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth. Now, one of the things I loved about this documentary was that it covered the honesty in their relationship. It mentioned the good and it mentioned the bad. Now, I know for some people that's kind of a touchy subject because nobody likes to, there's that stigma of we don't mock, or speak ill of the dead. But if you want to do a perfect portrayal of somebody's life, you have to mention the good and the bad. You got to mention the good times and the bad times, the times when the person was an angel and the times when the person was a prick. Because guess what? That's all of us in life. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is a perfect angel 24/7, 365. We're all imperfect people. We've all had moments where we've done good things. We've had moments where we've done bad things. The difference is the people who have, what makes you a good person is that when you look back on the bad things you've done, you have regrets or you feel remorse. That's the difference. The people who don't have remorse for the bad things they've done, those are the people that are fucked up. But anyway, Macho Man was one of the most intense characters of all time. And on a personal level, he was my favorite of all time. I loved the Macho Man Randy Savage as a kid growing up. As you know, I did the impression. In fact, Macho Man was the first wrestling impression I ever did. And I'm sure some people who've seen my comedy are probably shocked that I can do impersonations in my acts, usually because I haven't done them. Not because I don't want to, but because I could never find the right time to insert the impression into the act. I don't want to force it. I wanted it to come out naturally. And I'm learning to do that because at some point I'm going to need some new material. So I'm thinking about throwing those impressions in to kind of help out. And I've done a few along the way. I've done Hulk Hogan and I've done Jabba the Hutt recently in my act. But I'm hoping to add some more impressions down the road. But anyway, I also grew up being a fan when I was a kid and my dad and I would, play wrestling, there were times where I would literally do the Macho Man elbow. In fact, one time I remember my dad was asleep this is when I was a kid. I didn't do this recently, by the way, because if I did it recently, I'd probably kill him. But as a kid, I would literally climb up on the dresser and I used to wake my dad up by jumping up with the Macho Man, big elbow, and I would wake my dad up. And sometimes he would laugh, other times he would whoop my ass. And it just depended on what mood he was in when the elbow connected. So, anyway, as I mentioned before, big fan of the Macho Man. Looked forward to seeing this. And of course, Miss Elizabeth was an icon and a role model for so many women. Her character brought feeling and emotion to the matches. Elizabeth was like the yin to his yang. She was the one that I think made the Macho Man. I think she humanized the Macho Man. And that's what I loved about it. They were wrestling royalty. They were the first male and female package that was created in the new WWF model when Vince McMahon decided to take it another direction. And we'll get to that. They were the first and they were the best. And there's been so many male-female couples in wrestling, at least storyline-wise, since then. And very few have been able to touch the moniker of the Macho Man and Elizabeth. I don't think any other couple has, from an emotion standpoint, been able to top them. Now, if you disagree, comment below. Tell me your favorite couples, and we'll see if we can debate on that. Now, my favorite part of the documentary was when they asked Bruce Pritchard. They get to Bruce Pritchard to tell us. They say, "Tell us who you are," and he says, "I don't want to do that." And I kind of laughed, but it was also weird because I couldn't tell if he was serious or kidding because he had such a straight face. And the camera people weren't laughing. But then finally he mentioned who he was, and it was like, okay, he was kidding. And he talks about meeting Macho Man in 1987 in Houston, Texas, because he was, a young kid working in a promotion in Houston, because that's where Bruce Pritchard was born and raised. He's a Texas guy. And for a lot of people that may not know this, the Macho Man was a second-generation superstar. He was the son of Angelo Poffo, who was considered one of the greats. Now, and Angelo, after he got out of the business, ran a territory called ICW, which in this case stood for International Championship Wrestling, which is different from the ICW that most of us are aware of, which for those of you who may not know, that is Insane Championship Wrestling, which is based out of Glasgow, Scotland, and founded by Mark Dallas in 2006. So obviously, when most modern wrestling fans hear ICW, they think of the one in Scotland. When you hear me say ICW going forward in this video, I'm referring to Angelo's business, International Championship Wrestling. And it was considered by many to be an outlaw wrestling territory. Now, again, for those of you unclear with industry terms, outlaw usually means, and you may have heard Gator say this a few times on the show, outlaw basically means like is not like unorganized, like doesn't, not really a licensed show. Outlaw doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad wrestling territory. It just means that it doesn't really follow legal protocols from time to time. Now, if you hear a place being called a mud show, that's a disorganized, that's a horribly run wrestling promotion. It looks shitty, it's run shitty, the wrestlers in the ring are shitty. That's a mud show. And something's called an outlaw mud show, it's basically all those things combined. But anyway, when Randy first got in the business, it was during a time where you had to live your character 24/7. If you were crazy on screen, you had to be crazy off screen. And Randy played crazy very well. Like, if you thought the Macho Man in WWE or WCW, or even during the brief run he had in TNA, if you thought he was crazy and fucked up then, what I realized when they showed some of the ICW footage from Texas in this documentary, what we saw in the WWE and WCW and TNA, that was a tame Randy Savage. He was more crazy and fucked up in ICW than he ever was in the WWE. He was fucking like mental case, this guy. He was all smoked up on shit. You know, he did crazy outlaw behavior back then. He was a madman. You know, he really was fucked in the head. We didn't realize how much, but... And then, of course, we see his brother Lanny Poffo, which most modern wrestling fans know as the Genius, and also because he was the guy who accepted the award on behalf of Randy Savage when he was finally inducted into the Hall of Fame. You know, Lanny also still does some indie work from time to time. And he said that Randy was an alpha male with the dial off its hinges. Which is funny because in wrestling, most of the best gimmicks and characters were when the wrestlers were behaving like themselves, but turned the dial all the way up. Randy turned it all the way up and then broke it off, and it was just done. And he said Randy wanted to be a heel and took a lot of risks because heels could take risks and be more creative. Randy loved to play a heel. But even though he was loved by some fans and hated by others, every wrestling fan respected him because of his athleticism. Like the way he performed in the ring made you respect him even if you didn't like him, even if he wasn't your cup of tea. And what I loved about Randy Savage was he did a lot of jumping off the top rope and a lot of aerial spots, but he wasn't a spot monkey. It wasn't like modern fans today who do all the flippy dippy circus shit that I fucking can't stand. But although some people on the Boochcast can, I can't. But Randy knew how to time it. He knew how to place it very well, and he was a detail freak in the ring. That's what made Randy great. He paid attention to detail. He was focused on everything. No movement was ever wasted with the Macho Man. And I feel like if Randy was alive today, he could grab all those modern wrestlers by the ear, kind of drag them to the side, and teach them the right way. I figured there's one guy that could really get through to the modern wrestlers today, because it's blatantly obvious the legends currently alive today aren't doing that. I think Randy would be the best way to explain it to them. And then we cut to someone I'm very familiar with, Linda Hogan. Now, for those of you out there who are familiar with me and my career and my stand-up, you know Linda and I have had an interesting relationship. Linda to this day is still in my stand-up. And at one point, the joke I told about her was actually a closing bit in my act. Linda has an autograph table in her house. You know, the house that she got in the divorce when she cleaned Hogan out of all his shit. And she has an autograph table. And in my opinion, Linda doesn't deserve this autograph table. I was disgusted with watching this because I'm thinking, I don't believe that Linda Hogan has any love for the wrestling business at all. She has no love for it today. She might have loved it for a period of time back then, but I know her heart is not in the business. And she only brings it up to get attention on her because everything's about her. And, you know, she tells how she and Elizabeth became friends because Linda was the only other woman on the road. And, you know, because at the time, Linda was traveling with Hulk before they settled down and before they decided they wanted to have a family. This is back when it was just they were in love and just enjoying life before they wanted to have kids. Linda was on the road with Hogan. So Liz came on the road with Randy, and I'll get into more about that in a minute. But because they were only women on the road, they became friends. And I love how she went into so much detail about their friendship in this documentary. Yet when I spoke to her, you wouldn't even think they were friends, you know? I guess she needs to get paid to share that information. And to be honest, she comes off as a cunt throughout this whole video. And so you might be thinking, Vinny, are you still holding a grudge? Yeah, kinda. You know, I learned what a cunt she is. And here's the thing. One time I drove Kevin Sullivan home from a wrestling show, and he even told me, Linda's a cunt. So, I'm not the only one. No, I'm not the only one. But I'm not going to dive too deep into that, because if I keep talking about this, I'm going to use the word cunt too many times, and I don't want people to get uncomfortable. But just know, when you hear me say cunt, I only use it to describe women who are truly fucking horrendous to me. You know, most of the time I just say bitch when I don't like a woman. But for Linda, she is cunt level. And that's the last time we'll say that word, I promise. Anyway, so we get into more story about Elizabeth, which Linda's more than happy to share. Hashtag cunt. Anyway, Elizabeth was from Frankfort, Kentucky. She grew up broke. Randy met Elizabeth at a gym. Now, Elizabeth worked the front desk of the gym, and Randy worked out there regularly. So that's how he knew her. One day, Randy walked up to her to sign in at the gym, and Elizabeth said, "Your eyes are so red." And Randy says, "You should see them from this side, yeah." And then, of course, they were like, that's the line that apparently hooked her. And I love when Randy talks about the relationship. He goes, "It was love at first sight. I mean, of course it was. How could you feast your eyes on the Macho Man and not want a piece of this and immediately fall for it?" And of course, Randy goes off about that. And then Liz goes, "It took a while." And I like the way she said that, because that to me is how you know a couple is truly in love. Like, Liz is not denying she fell for Randy Savage head over heels. But she's not going to sit there and pretend like Randy it was automatic. Liz made him work for it. Anyway, Elizabeth later gets involved in ICW as an announcer and also helped with the editing of the shows because it was a mom and pop run business. They were doing everything themselves behind the scenes. So what I loved about this was knowing that before they got to the WWE, Liz was already in the business and smartened up to it. She didn't walk into WWE greener than baby shit. You know, so I enjoyed that. So then they talk about their first wedding was at Liz's mom's house, and it was 6 months before he made his debut with WWE. So they got married in 1985, because Randy debuted with the WWE in 1985. That's when he had his first match. And it was right around the time of WrestleMania 1, because he was trying to snatch Randy up for that. Because Vince McMahon Jr., when he took over the WWF, he ran through all the territories and took all the talent because he wanted to build this empire. And Randy was one of the guys he brought in. So Vince said he wanted Randy to have a valet. He thought it would make him look good. And Randy suggested his wife, Elizabeth, because she was already going to be on the road. He said, let's put her on camera. Now, you see, Randy was the type of person, regardless of how people feel about him, where if he loved you, he was loyal to you and helped you if he could. And the crowd fell in love with Elizabeth instantly. She became the first lady of wrestling, which is what most people know her as. She was a demure and gentle soul, and they were polar opposites, which made it work. They wanted people to love Liz and hate Randy, because Randy was a heel. So he would browbeat her verbally in the middle of matches, and it would help him get his heat. Because Randy would do so well in the ring, crowds would cheer. So to get his heat, if at any point Liz was getting too excited moving around, Randy would jump out of the ring and go, "I told you to stand over here, Elizabeth. Don't you move till I tell you can move." And then people in the crowd would say, "Honey, you can do better than him." Because if there's one thing women cannot stand, is watching a man yell at a woman. Guys don't like it either, but women, especially in the 80s, hate that shit. because he would shoot her a look and yell at her, and Liz would be submissive because she loved him. He'd be like, finish pausing that belt, Elizabeth, and don't interrupt me again. And she's like, yes, Randy, and she would start cleaning and cleaning and cleaning, and it was so fucking great. But here was the genius behind this. When you're first watching this live, it looks like he's mistreating her. But when you really look at it objectively, when you look back on that, you realize something. It looks like he's mistreating her, but he never really does. He's just intense. He's intense. He's overprotective. He loves Elizabeth. But to the untrained eye, it looks like he's treating her badly. But really, he's just trying to protect her and doesn't want her to get hurt. And he's intense about it. So, he's a good guy. He's just overly emotional. And it was great booking and great psychology. It told a story. And it got Randy over before he even locked up with the guy he was wrestling. That's talent. And the problem with talent is Randy was a perfectionist. And he hated that he could never top the match he had with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. Because perfectionists are never happy. And Randy always wanted to give more, but sometimes you can give too much. And Randy never knew when to dial it back. He never knew when enough was enough. And as much as I hate Ricky Steamboat for reasons I've already mentioned on the podcast, I'll even admit that was a fantastic match. Do I think it was the best match Randy ever had? No, but I can see why it was so popular and why Randy never hated the fact he could never top that. And that would mess up anybody because clearly Randy's career wasn't over after WrestleMania 3. But if people are saying that's the best match he ever had, what does that make all the other matches he had? Like, I think the feud he had with Diamond Dallas Page was phenomenal, but we'll talk about that later. But anyway, Macho always kept Elizabeth in the dressing room. So nobody ever really knew her. Until one day, he came into Linda and Hulk's dressing room because him and Hulk were friends. He turns to Hogan and goes, "Where's Linda? Liz needs some help with her hair." And he trusted Linda because they were all friends. And apparently her hair was coiffed and tightly curled, looked like she was going to church. So Linda was like, "Bitch, you need to bring that stuff out, okay?" So Linda teased it and stacked it out, and that's when they became friends. He helped fix her hair, and they started bonding. Now, Randy eventually became a babyface because of how popular he was. And Vince decided to create the Mega Powers, with Hulk Hogan. And Liz becomes their manager. Because Liz was an on-camera talent, obviously, Linda wasn't. And they created this team, storyline-wise, with the intent to break them up later. So they knew when they put the Mega Powers together, eventually it was going to explode. That was all part of the plan. That wasn't something they just came up with down the road. But I will say this. As great as the Mega Powers were, and as great as that breakup was, I think it's bullshit they ran through so many tag teams in the WWE and so many stars. They never held the tag team titles. Well, they should have been former WWE tag team champions. They should have been former WCW tag team champions. And I will stake my claim to that. They should have held the tag belts in WWE. And it's bullshit they didn't. Randy should have been a double champion. There, I said it. So anyway, Randy is a paranoid schizophrenic. And Hulk is the all-American hero. So what's the easiest thing for men to argue over? A woman. Now, I have my personal disagreements about that because that's not always the case. I don't think that's the easiest thing for men to argue over. But in this storyline instance, it worked. So we get to SummerSlam 88. They're still a team. Randy hoists Liz on his shoulders. That's how he used to celebrate. Now, at one point, Liz is kind of teetering, like she's going to fall off his shoulders. So Hulk goes to hold her up to steady her so she can stay up there and everything's great. But when you notice, Hogan's hand is on her ass. And apparently, later on, when Randy would see that, instead of saying, "Oh, he helped my wife," or my girlfriend in this case, because even though they were married outside the ring, they weren't married on camera, all he saw was, "Look how long his hands are touching Elizabeth." And he just freaks out, And then, of course, that's when they cut to the intense promo where Randy accuses Hogan of having love for Elizabeth. He's like, Hulk Hogan, you got lust in your eyes and in your black heart for Elizabeth. You picked her up and you put Elizabeth where she's never been before, on top of another man's shoulders. Sorry, almost fucked my throat up on that one. But anyway, what was great about that was true. After a match, Hogan, because Liz was their manager, Hogan had a singles match, he put Liz on his shoulders to celebrate. But he figures, hey, she's my manager too. I can celebrate with her too. Hogan's not doing anything sexual. They're just celebrating. But Randy's taking it to another level because he's paranoid. So eventually in the Mega Powers feud at WrestleMania 4, Randy became the champion. And Hogan celebrates with him. But now he thinks everyone's out to get him when he's the champion, even his best friend. And it worked because he was paranoid and protective of Liz in real life. Like, if anybody tried to talk to her or carry on a conversation with her, Randy would get mad. Randy didn't want anyone making fun of her, so he controlled what she wore and how she even entered the ring. He didn't want anybody, like, looking up her skirt and going, damn, she's hot. Randy didn't want any of that. And when you take real-life feelings and make it part of the storyline, it works. Sometimes life imitates art, and art imitates life. Now, they didn't even go out and party afterwards. Like, after shows, they would go back to the hotel and Liz would clean the blood off the boots and wash the gear, like Linda did for Hulk after matches. And some nights, Randy, as a husband, wants to have sex. Sometimes Liz is not in the mood. And Liz is also, because she's on camera, she has to worry about what dress she's going to wear for the next show. And having your wife on the road is brutal. And even Jake the Snake says this, because the guys act like savages. Like, they pull pranks like peeing and shitting in people's suitcases. They have no boundaries. They'll cut off people's hair while they're passed out. And that's why Randy was so protective of Elizabeth. He didn't want him around these fucking psychos. Because, look, with all due respect to the wrestling business, wrestlers back then did not function well in regular society. So they were nuts. They were like little children sometimes. And even today, some of them can be little children sometimes. Believe me. I know. And Randy was very protective, but there is such a thing as overkill. Like, obviously, you want to protect her from certain people, but if somebody's just talking to her, that's no reason to get upset. And Liz wanted a normal life eventually, but Randy wasn't done. So anyway, what really made the Mega Powers ultimately explode was during the match they had with the Twin Towers, which was the Big Boss Man and Akeem. Randy takes a bump outside the ring and lands on Elizabeth, accidentally. Hogan sees that she's hurt and carries her to the back. Randy is out there fighting for his life, and Hogan's sitting there worrying about Liz. Like, he's literally standing by the bedside. They're like trying to check on her, and he's freaking out. And this is the final breaking point for Randy, because Randy finally realizes, you care more about Elizabeth than anything else. You wanted to ignore me because you lust for Elizabeth. And Hogan's trying to explain that he doesn't. Randy attacks him. They finally break up. And Liz decides, to be in a neutral corner. She's not going to be in anybody's corner. The Mega Powers explode. Hogan eventually takes the belt from Randy Savage and becomes the world champion for a second time. But at this point, Liz is basically done with the road. So Liz decides to take some time off from the road, and they replace her with Queen Sherry, when Randy reinvented himself as the Macho King. So for those of you out there that were always wondering why Sherry replaced Liz, that was the real life reason. Because they wanted to give Liz some time off the road. The only problem is, during this rivalry, people care more about Liz than Sherry. Like, all they cared about was, where's Liz? No one gave a shit about Queen Sherry. That's not a knock on Sherry. She's definitely a Hall of Famer and incredible talent, but nobody cared. Now, eventually, Randy got to the point where he wanted to finally take time off from the road and focus on his marriage and being in love and spending time with Liz, because clearly the business was getting to them. And it was because of Randy wanting to take time off, that's what led to the career versus career match at WrestleMania 7 between the Macho Man and the Ultimate Warrior. Ultimately, the Warrior would win the match. The Macho Man would have the send-off. And what they did was they made it very clear to, let people know Liz was in the crowd. She's like in the fourth row watching this event. And after Randy lost the match, Queen Sherry turns on him, starts stomping on him and beating him up in the ring because Randy's already pretty much knocked out from losing to the Warrior, who's already left the ring at this point because Warrior's a babyface and the damage already been done. And then Liz jumps out of her seat, hops over the guardrail, runs down, grabs Sherry, throws her out of the ring, and then you have that emotional moment with Liz and Randy reuniting, and the crowd bursts into genuine tears. Like, there are grown men and women in that audience crying their eyes out because of this moment right here. It is insane. Now, eventually, after they worked things out and Randy was eventually ready to come back to TV, Randy married Liz on TV because they kept their real marriage kayfabe the whole time. So she was just a girlfriend on screen. At the wedding, it was the first time Randy showed an emotion other than anger on television. They showed he was happy and caring. But then, at the wedding reception, there's a cobra in a box that pops out during the wedding reception. This starts the rivalry with Jake the Snake Roberts. Now, Randy wants the snake to bite Jake because, we get to that story that Jake loves to tell about how Randy felt, that snake, he's like, is that snake been fixed? And it's like, yeah, he goes, maybe he has and maybe he hasn't. And he makes Jake have the snake bite him in the locker room and say, don't fucking move, don't take no antidotes, don't take no pills. And they eventually, to make sure he's not going to get poisoned, he goes, seems like you're going to be okay. And then he's all right with it. And before the match, he even says, after the snake bites me, bring him back. I may want you to hook it again because I want to make sure this angle works and we make some big fucking money. So when the snake finally latches on to Macho Man, it took forever to get the snake off of Randy. But here's the thing. Eventually, Liz had to run out to the ring because in real life, that snake would not let go. Because when Randy was looking, Jake paintbrushed the shit out of the snake because he was mad at the fact that Randy made Jake have the snake bite him. So he wanted to get a receipt. So it took forever to get the snake off of Randy. But people were more concerned with Liz's reaction than Randy being bit by the snake. The visual shocked people in the audience, and everything went crazy. And here's how serious people take wrestling. At one point during the feud, Jake slapped Liz on television. And when she and Randy went home to visit her family, they wouldn't let Randy in the house because he let her get hurt. Randy had to whoop Jake's ass to get back in their good graces, because they were Tennessee people. Wrestling's real. People are fake. That's how serious people took the business back then. And that is how you create emotion. That's how serious people take the wrestling business. So when you see old timers getting mad at the new guys for not respecting kayfabe or taking things seriously, it's because those were the sacrifices they made to give the fans their money's worth. So now around this time, they were on the verge of breaking up. So Hogan was, and this is the big story. We've heard Hogan tell this story numerous times. I love this scene because it solidifies the fact that Hogan was telling the truth. Because so many people thought, oh, Hogan's a bullshit, pathological liar. Well, turns out he wasn't because he's not even affiliated with this fucking documentary, which shocked the hell out of me. Why would you not have Hulk in this thing? But whatever. But Hogan left to go film the movie Mr. Nanny in Miami. And Liz asked to go down there to help Linda babysit the kids while Hulk was filming. Because, Linda's basically by herself because Hogan's on a set all day. So then Randy says, well, as long as you're just going to help Linda, that's fine. Other than that, he wouldn't let her leave the house. So eventually she gets in the car. She packed the car, goes to Miami. Later on, they were going out to dinner, but Linda couldn't find Liz. Turns out Liz got a different room that some guy offered for her. Now, whether or not she slept with this guy or not was not clarified. I personally think she probably did, but I don't know for sure. That's just an opinion. But Randy calls looking for Liz. Linda says she's not here, which is the truth, but she's not telling the whole truth. Randy eventually flies down to Miami because he's uncomfortable because Liz never misses his calls. So now he's suspicious and paranoid. Now Randy busts through the hotel, starts yelling at Linda, going, where's Liz? Liz says, I don't know. And Randy tells her, you better sit down in that chair. I'm going to go find Liz, and I swear to God, if you smarten her up to the fact that I'm here, there's going to be trouble. Finally, Hulk walks in, sees he's yelling at his wife. That's already not so he ain't playing that shit. But still, he eventually calms Randy down because Hulk at this point is the only one who can. And they go find Liz. Hogan comes back, tells Linda, I found Liz. They're working it out. Randy and Liz basically drive back home. And Randy felt betrayed by Hulk and Linda over the whole thing. And this basically becomes the end of Hulk and Randy's friendship. Like, they're not going to hang out with them anymore because they're becoming a bad influence on Liz in his eyes. Randy now thinks that Hulk and Linda are trying to break them up. That's his paranoia at this point. And so now this ended the lifelong friendship of Hulk and Randy. Now, Hulk had nothing to do with Liz's behavior. Hulk was just filming a movie. Liz and Linda were off doing their own thing. Hogan didn't even... Hulk was barely around Liz because he's off filming the movie. Now, 6 weeks after they filmed Mr. Nanny and they're back home, Liz calls Linda and tells her she left Randy and was going back to Miami to stay with some people she met down there. Because ultimately, Liz wanted freedom. And even though Randy behaved the way he did out of wanting to protect Liz, she felt smothered. And like I said before, there is such a thing as overkill. Like, after a certain point, if you shelter someone for too long, eventually they're going to end up wanting to leave you, and they're going to end up wanting to do the very things you tried to keep them away from. And look, ultimately, if you have a child or a spouse or a friend, you want to protect them from bad things. But eventually, you have to let them find their way. You have to eventually trust that they're not going to make those mistakes. And if they do make those mistakes, just be willing to help them if they really, really want it. So, anyway, Randy was different after the breakup. He went silent. He lost his love for everything. He was never happy, even when he had it all. Like, Randy was one of those people that could never be content because he's a perfectionist. So eventually, years later, Hulk talked to Eric about hiring Randy to come to WCW. Because Hogan's told this story where one day he talked to Randy. They went to Gold's Gym, got a case of beer, sat down and talked. And Randy eventually apologized to Hogan for, blaming him for his marriage. He was just mad. Hogan said, I understand, and they reconciled and became buddies. Now, Vince decided that Randy was too old and his gimmick was over and his shtick was done. They made him a color commentator and Randy hated it. Also, another cool thing, when they signed Randy, they got a Slim Jim sponsorship of $750,000 a year, and it practically paid Randy's salary. And neither WCW nor Slim Jim was interested in reinventing Randy Savage. Turns out Randy Savage still had a lot more to give at his age. But that's the funny part. Vince is like, you're old, we're putting you out to pasture. Macho goes WCW, says, fuck you, I'm not too old, I can still go with the best. And he had some of the best rivalries in WCW. That's why I laugh today when I hear people say, this guy's too old, that guy's too old. Fuck you. Some of these old timers can still fucking go because they know what they're doing. They have psychology. If you know psychology and how to work a crowd, you can work long after people think you're done. And also, when Randy called Liz and got her a job at WCW for $250,000 a year. Even though they were divorced, he still cared enough about her to still get her a job. So when they decided to bring back Liz and work a storyline in that, Randy made sure Liz was taken care of. And she would stand there and look pretty and wasn't on camera much, but still got good money in WCW. Only this time, Liz became the villain and Randy was the babyface. And Liz was eventually paired with Lex Luger on screen, and eventually she starts seeing Lex in real life, despite the fact that he was married. Liz still dated him. Linda told her it was a bad idea because their friendship maintained. Even after Hogan and Randy would later, their friendship would end a second time, and then eventually they would reconcile older in life before Randy passed away, which we'll get to later. Linda and Liz always stayed friends. And Randy watched Lex like a hawk because technically in this time, Savage and Liz are not married anymore. But he still protected her. He protected Liz in a different way this time. Instead of like telling her what to do, he just watched to make sure nothing would happen. And then Liz and Lex, of course, started doing drugs. Liz used to get drunk after 2 glasses of wine, but Liz started taking the same amount of pills as Lex, which is unhealthy because Liz weighs way less than Lex does. And then, of course, the domestic violence incident where Liz's right eye was red and swollen, and her left eye was bruised and got darker as the cop was taking the statement. Also, there was a lump on the left side of her head. At first, she denies Lex hit her, but later confesses that he did. And Lex was brutally honest about the whole thing on Eric's podcast, Eric Bischoff. Eric almost didn't want to do it because he still had resentment towards Lex at the time of the phone call to book him, but it went away after that interview. Lex said that he and Liz were drinking vodka and popping pills while watching movies together. Before the 911 call, he realized she stopped breathing, and Lex freaks out on the phone. Eric was pissed off when he found out Liz died. He felt that Lex was manipulating and exploiting a vulnerable person and used prescription drugs to do it. Lex was arrested because of all the drugs in the apartment and not necessarily for the death of Liz. So Lex did go to jail for what happened, but not because of the death of Liz, because that was ruled an accident, but because of all the drugs in the apartment. And when it was crazy, they play the 911 call. When you hear it, the most interesting thing about this is the fact that when they play the 911 call, you can tell Lex is genuinely freaking out. You can tell that he's nervous and doesn't know what to do. So I think it was an accident. I don't blame Lex for it, but I can see how he would freak out because he doesn't know what to do. And he's calling 911, so he's trying to get her help. You know, normally if you want someone dead, you don't call 911. That's a fact. You just don't. So I believe Lex in that regard. Obviously, the Macho Man felt bad for her family, and he said they did have closure on everything that happened between them before she died. And then, of course, 7 years after Liz's death, he got remarried after meeting his high school sweetheart. He later met up with his high school sweetheart, and they got married. He devoted a lot of time with the Special Olympics helping out. And then, of course, Randy had a heart attack behind the wheel and crashed his car in 2010. And that's when, he died. His wife was banged up, but Randy died. And I found this out after I got off the air with the regular guys. Like I literally did a show with the regular guys. It happened at 10 a.m., which is when the show used to wrap up. And during that time, I wrapped up the show. I hopped in my car. I'm driving to the Home Depot for work because I worked at the Home Depot at the time. And that's when Tim Andrews called me and told me about, did I hear about Randy's death? I said, yeah. And he said, do you want to deliver a eulogy on Monday? And I did. So I went into the regular guys show that Monday, and I read the eulogy for Randy Savage. And obviously I don't have time to read it right now, but if I can find it, I'm sure it's buried somewhere in the archives. I may or may not read the eulogy here on the YouTube channel if you guys want. Comment below, let me know. But obviously, I was devastated to hear about Randy Savage's death because Randy was, like I said, my favorite of all time. Eric loved Randy because of the way he treated kids, especially his kids. Randy also loved Brooke and Nick, who were Hogan's kids, and they talked about the Hall of Fame. Obviously, the Macho Man is in the Hall of Fame, deserves to be there. But it turns out part of the reason it took so long to get him in there was for 2 reasons. One, when Randy was alive, he wanted his whole family to come in with him. WWE didn't because they felt the Macho Man was the only one that contributed to the WWE. They didn't want the rest of the family. And when Randy died, Lanny Poffo was the patriarch. He wanted to respect Randy's wishes and not put him in. But then one day he realized that it's never going to happen. He can't hold on to this grudge forever. I have to let my brother take his rightful place in the Hall of Fame. And that's why Lanny finally gave the blessing. And then Hogan gave the induction. Lanny accepted the award. But everybody talks about Liz in the Hall of Fame. And Liz 100% deserves the Hall of Fame. She's the first female superstar who never wrestled. She was the first female depicted in a powerful role and was classy. And, I've seen so many other people go into the Hall of Fame. Liz deserves the Hall of Fame. I don't know who would accept the award on her behalf. But as far as who would induct her, that's a tough one. I don't know who would induct Liz into the Hall of Fame. But I can only think of 3 people. I don't know if any of them are good. And those 3 people, if I really think about this, are Lex Luger, Linda Hogan, maybe Jake the Snake. I don't know. I can't think of anybody else at this point that would induct Liz in the Hall of Fame. Maybe Eric Bischoff. I don't know. I'll think of something. But anyway, basically to sum this up, it's the best love story in the history of wrestling. And this was a great start to this whole entire docuseries. I think it was great. I think it was fantastic. And I think that if you're truly a fan of professional wrestling, you need to know the history of Macho Man Elizabeth. And if you're a couple in wrestling, in the business, you should watch this to learn what to do and what not to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will conclude episode 1 of the Boochcast covers Darkside of the Ring. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button and ring that bell to be notified so you never miss another episode of the Boochcast covers Darkside of the Ring, as well as other additional Boochcast YouTube content. Also, make sure you guys tune in next week. We got another great episode for you guys. We'll be diving into the Montreal Screwjob next week here on the Boochcast. That's right. So we're going to talk about the Montreal Screwjob episode, give our thoughts on it, everything else. Rest in peace to the Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth. And I hope you guys will check back soon for a new episode. And until then, pizza, baby!